There is a kind of giving the world never claps for. The kind done with flour on your hands and your name left off the dish. Most folks who give that way stop expecting to be thanked, and after a while they stop noticing they were ever overlooked at all. But here is something worth remembering at midnight, when you lie awake wondering if any of it mattered. God always sees the one the world walks past. Let me tell you about a widow in Marigold, Alabama, who lived that truth before she ever knew she would need it. If you have ever poured yourself out for people who never once said your name, then sit close, because this story belongs to you too. Her name was Cora Pruitt, 58 years old that autumn of 1936, with hands that knew cast iron the way other women's hands knew a hymnal. Her husband Elam had been gone 4 years, taken by a fever that came on a Tuesday and finished him by Friday, and he'd left her the little wood frame house at the bend of the red clay road, the one with the chinaberry tree out front and the screen door that sang on its hinge. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and the kitchen in it was where Cora did the only thing she'd ever found she was truly good at. When grief came to a family in Coffee County, and in those years it came often, in the shape of influenza and field accidents and old hearts giving out, Cora Pruitt cooked. She didn't wait to be asked. She heard the news the way you hear thunder, and before the body was cold, she had the stove lit and the chickens plucked and the cornbread rising. She had a dish she carried it all in, a plain blue and white enamel casserole with a chip out of the lid, wrapped warm in a flour sack towel against her chest. That dish had walked into more sorrow than any preacher in the county. She'd carry it up the steps of a house full of weeping, set it down on the table among the others, and slip out the back door before anybody thought to ask who'd brought it. "No need," she'd murmur if a child caught her leaving. "Y'all just eat." That was the way she liked it. She used to say, when Elam was alive and teased her about it, that the Lord saw, and the Lord's seeing was enough. "Cora," he'd laugh, "you'd feed the whole world and starve at your own table." And she would smile, because she didn't think it was true, and because a little of it was. 11 years she'd done this. 11 years of funeral hams and pots of butter beans and pound cakes still warm from the oven, carried down that clay road in the gray light of mornings nobody else wanted to be awake for. She bought what she needed on credit at Tom Mabry's grocery, the old man letting her run a tab and settling it quiet. And she paid it back a nickel at a time when she had a nickel. When Mabry passed last winter, she'd grieved him like kin and cooked for his family too, and never once thought about what records a dead man leaves behind. That was not the kind of thing Cora kept track of. She kept track of who was hurting. There was a widow named Effie Dahl out past the Gin Road who'd lost her husband that very week, and Cora had fed that house 6 days running, the blue dish making the trip each evening warm and full. On the 6th evening she carried it in and set it among the platters, and Effie Dahl, red-eyed and wrung out, looked up from her chair and turned to the woman beside her and said, "Who made all this food? Somebody surely ought to thank them." And Cora was standing right there, the towel still folded over her arm, close enough to touch. She only nodded and gave a small, soft sound that wasn't quite a word, and let herself out the back door so nobody would have to feel the awkwardness of it. The screen door sang behind her. She walked the clay road home in the dusk with her empty dish, and if it stung, she didn't let it stay. The Lord saw. that was enough. Maybe you know that feeling better than you'd care to admit. The doing and the not being seen. Then came the Sunday that turned everything. It was the last cotton was coming in, wood smoke and the smell of somebody's supper ham drifting down the lane, the chinaberry going gold. Cora had been up since 4 cooking for the Caldwell family, who'd buried their grandfather Thursday, and she still had flour ghosting her apron and dusting the backs of her hands when she walked up to the white wood-framed church for the morning service, the bell just beginning to ring out over the fields. People were filing in, men in their stiff collars, women holding the hands of scrubbed children, and there, tacked square to the church door where every soul would pass it, was a printed notice. Cora didn't read fast. She had to stop and work the words out one at a time, her lips moving, the morning gone strangely quiet in her ears. Notice of foreclosure and public auction, and below it, plain as a slap, the description of a wood-frame dwelling at the bend of the Marigold Road. Her road. Her house. The chinaberry tree was in the surveyor's words. There was a sum of money owed that she had never in her life heard spoken. A loan, it said, in default, principal and interest taken against the property, the signature her Elam's. A small thing once. Grown now, with 4 years of interest piled on it like silt, into a number that might as well have been the moon. The paper trembled because her hand was trembling. Folks slowed as they passed. A few read over her shoulder and went quiet and hurried on inside, not meeting her eyes. Cora stood on the church step in the ringing of the bell with flour on her hands, and the whole warm morning gone cold around her, and somewhere behind her, a man's measured footsteps were coming up the path, unhurried, certain. The footsteps of someone who already knew exactly what that paper said, because he was the one who'd written it. Wendell Skeggs was a tidy man, 44 years old, and he wore his Sunday coat buttoned all the way up, even on a warm morning, because Wendell believed a man's clothes ought to argue his case before he opened his mouth. He came up the church path with his hat in his hand and his ledger under his arm, and he stopped 1 step below Cora so the whole congregation, slowing now at the gate, could see them both. "Mornin', Miss Pruitt," he said, and his voice was not unkind, which was somehow the worst of it. "I expect you've read the notice." Cora's mouth was dry. She held the paper out toward him, as if he might take it back, as if it were a thing she could return. "Mr. Skeggs," she said, I never knew Elam owed against the place. I'd have paid it. I'd have found a way." "Well, now," Skeggs said, and he opened the ledger right there on the step and turned it so the morning light fell on a column of figures. "That's just the trouble, isn't it? He took the loan in 31, $80 to carry all through the bad cotton year. He never told you. He never made a payment past the first spring, and he's been 4 years in the ground, and the interest doesn't stop just because a man does." He said it the way you'd explain weather to a child. $80 has grown to a hair over 212. The bank's carried it long as it can. By now the steps were crowded. The Caldwells were there, whose grandfather she'd buried Thursday, the funeral ham still warm in their kitchen from her hands. Effie Dahl stood at the gate in her black dress. Half the faces on those steps had eaten from the blue dish in their worst week, and Cora knew every one of them. "Mr. Skeggs," she said, low, "the cotton money comes in 3 weeks. I'd do for folks. I can take in wash. I can sell the layin' hens. Just give me till the cotton's settled, and I'll bring you what I can and beg the rest. Please. It's all Elam left me. And here is where Wendell Skeggs did the thing that makes a person's blood go hot to hear it. He closed the ledger with a soft clap and looked at her. And then he looked out over the gathered people, because he wanted them to hear it too. "Miss Pruitt," he said, loud and patient and certain, "a woman who can't keep her own accounts has got no business keeping a house. You didn't even know what you owed. 4 years, and you never once asked. That's not the bank's failing. That's yours." A few of the men shifted their feet. "Your husband, God rest him, was a fool to leave a debt on a woman's shoulders, and a bigger fool to leave it on yours, for everybody in this county knows you'd give away the very roof over your head if a stranger came crying at the door. You can't run a household on tears and table scraps. The auction stands, first Saturday of next month, on the courthouse steps." And he set his hat back on his head, and he nodded to the preacher's wife as polite as you please, and he walked on into the church to take his pew. Now here's the part I have to tell you slow, because it is the part that ought to make you angry, and you should let it. Cora stood there with flour still on her hands and that paper shaking, and she looked out at the faces of the people she had fed for 11 years. Effie Dahl, 6 suppers running. The Caldwells, 3 days now. The Renfros, the Tatums, old Sister Birch, whose husband she'd cooked for back in 29. They were all there. And not one of them, not one, said a word. They looked at the ground. They looked at their shoes and at the chinaberry leaves and at the sky, anywhere but at her. And one by one they filed past her up the steps and into the church. And the bell stopped ringing, and the singing started up inside without her. And Cora Pruitt stood alone on the steps in the silence she had spent her whole life saving other people from. Maybe you have stood somewhere like that. Maybe you have looked around for one face to meet yours and found every one of them turned away. If you have, you know it isn't the cruelty of the loud man that breaks you. It's the silence of the kind ones. She walked home alone down the red clay road, the flour drying on her hands. She did not go in to the service. She could not have sung. That evening, when the light went amber and her stomach reminded her she had not eaten since before 4 that morning, Cora went to her own pantry to fix herself a little supper. And she opened the door, and she stood there a long time. The shelves were bare to the boards. The flour bin held a cup, maybe less, swept to the corners. The egg basket was empty. She'd carried the last 6 to the Caldwells in a sweetbread Friday. The jars of beans she'd put up in summer, gone, every one, into other people's grief. 1 tin of lard, scraped clean and ringing hollow when she tapped it. A heel of cornbread going hard. And there on the middle shelf sat the blue and white dish, the chipped lid set on crooked, cold and clean and empty, waiting like it always waited to be filled and carried off to somebody else. The woman who had fed half of Coffee County stood in front of a pantry that could not feed her. Her hands began to shake, and this time she did not have anyone to be brave for. She crossed to the kitchen table, Elam's table, the one he'd built the first year they married, and she did not so much sit as come down into the chair like something cut loose. The kerosene lamp was not lit. The dark came into the room around her, and Cora Pruitt who had never in her life asked God for a single thing for herself, put her face down into her flower-white hands and prayed the only words she had left. "Lord," she whispered, "Lord, I never asked, not once. I fed them like you said. I never made them thank me. I gave it all away gladly, you know I did." Her breath caught. "And now there's nothing on the shelf, and nobody at the door, and they're going to take Elam's house. And not one soul stood up for me. Not one." The tears came hot and silent down into her hands. "I'm not asking for the house. I'm asking, did you see me? All them years, carrying that dish in the dark. Did you ever once see me at all? Or am I just nobody, Lord? Just nobody ever bothered to look at?" And then there was nothing, no answer, only the tick of the cooling stove and the chinaberry branch scraping the window in the night wind, and an old woman alone in a dark kitchen, emptied out to the boards, waiting on a God she could no longer feel. Now while Cora sat in her dark kitchen a quarter-mile up the road in the parsonage, a young man was on his knees in a back room, sneezing in the dust. Reverend Tom Hadley was barely 30, new to Marigold since the spring, and he was the only soul in that whole county who owed Cora Pruitt nothing. Had never buried kin, had never eaten from her dish, had never learned the town's habit of looking past her. He was clearing the parsonage's back room of the things the old preacher left, and that was where he found it. A fat, water-stained grocer's ledger, the property of Tom Mabry, dead these past 10 months. Hadley near tossed it on the burn pile, but a thing in him said, "Open it." And he sat down on a crate and opened it, and he could not stop. Page after page, the same patient hand. September 4th, 29. Flour, lard, 2 hens, settled. For the Pruitt funeral meal, the Eldridge family. November 30. Sugar, meal, coffee. Pruitt for the Tatums, their baby. On and on, 11 years of it. Every nickel that woman could not pay, old Mabry had quietly carried, and every dish she'd carried in the dark he had written down, because somebody had to, and the grocer knew the town never would. Hadley counted the names twice. Dozens. There was not a family in Coffee County missing from that book. He sat in the dust a long while. Then he walked through the dark to the bend in the road, and he knocked on Cora's door, and when she opened it, he saw the bare shelf behind her and the cold dish on it, and he understood more than he could say. "Miss Pruitt," he said softly, holding up the book, "I don't believe you ever knew anybody was keeping count." Her face crumpled. "Ain't nobody keeps count, Reverend. That ain't why a body does it." "No, ma'am," he said, "but somebody did. And I'll tell you something truer than that." He took her flower-worn hand in both of his. "The Lord keeps a ledger too, ma'am, and yours has been full a long time." And the words went into her like water into cracked ground, and for the first time since the church steps, Cora Pruitt wept. And it was not the weeping of being broken, but of being seen. The first Saturday of the month came gray and cold, but the auction was set for after the morning service, and so the people came to church first, near the whole county packed into those pews, and Skeggs stood at the back by the door in his buttoned coat, with the auction papers folded in his pocket, waiting on the gavel. Reverend Hadley walked to the front. He did not open the hymnal. He held up the grocer's ledger so all could see it. "Before we sing," he said, "I'm going to read you some names." And he read, "The Eldridge family, the week they lost their boy. The Tatums, when the baby died. Sister Birch, when her husband passed in '29. The Renfros, the Caldwells, just this week. Effie Dahl, 6 suppers running." His voice did not rise. It did not have to. Name after name after name, 11 years of grief, and after each one the same 4 words, "Fed by Cora Pruitt." The church went so still you could hear the wood stove tick. Effie Dahl put her hand over her mouth. The Caldwell man bowed his head, and they understood, all of them at once, that the woman they had let stand alone on those steps, the woman about to be put out of her house this very hour, was the woman who had walked into every one of their worst days carrying a warm dish and asking nothing. Hadley closed the book. "She never let you thank her," he said. "She slipped out the back so you wouldn't have to. The bank means to sell her home today, over $212. I'd not be much of a shepherd if I let that happen in a house full of the people she fed." For one breath, nobody moved. Then old Sister Birch rose, trembling, and walked to the front, and laid a folded bill on the communion rail. Then the Caldwell man. Then Effie Dahl, emptying her coin purse with shaking hands. Then they came row by row, the whole church on its feet, men digging silver out of their cotton money, children pressing pennies into the pile, until the rail was buried in coins and crumpled bills. $200, then twice that, then more. The debt covered 3 times over, and still they came. And at the back of his own church, Wendell Skeggs stood frozen, the auction papers useless in his pocket, the gin company's lot slipping through his fingers with every coin that fell. He could not auction a house whose debt was paid before witnesses. He put on his hat and walked out into the cold, and the gin deal died that morning with the gavel that never fell. And within the year he had moved on to some other town that did not yet know him, leaving Marigold behind. As for Cora, they sent her home in a neighbor's wagon, and when she climbed down at the bend in the road, there on her own front steps sat a covered dish, warm, wrapped in a flour sack towel. Then she saw another beside it, and another. The whole town had come up the clay road behind her and set their dishes on her steps the way she had set hers on theirs for 11 years. And the woman who had fed everyone sank down among them and wept over a doorstep full of warm food set there by hands that finally knew her name. God honors the ones the world refused to see, and the day He lifts them, He does it where everyone is watching. And friend, hear me before you go. Maybe you are the one who gives and never hears your name said back to you. Maybe you have carried your own quiet dish down a dark road for years, and lately you have wondered, the way Cora wondered, whether anybody saw, whether God Himself saw, or whether you are just nobody bothers to look at. Hear this tonight. You are not invisible to heaven. There is a ledger, and your name is written in it, and every kindness you ever did in secret, every dish, every dollar, every hour you gave when no one clapped, has been counted by the only one who never once looked past you. The world keeps no record of the meek. but God does. And in His time, in His way, He lifts the overlooked right out in the open. Let us pray. Father, thank you for seeing what the world walks past. Thank you that no kindness given in your name is ever wasted, that you keep the count we cannot keep, and that in your time you lift the lowly where every eye can see. For every weary giver listening tonight, let them know they are seen by you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for staying with me to the end of Cora's story, friend. If you have ever felt unseen, take her with you tonight, and remember you were never nobody to God. If this story found you, share it with someone who needs it, and type "He sees me" in the comments so we know you were here.